Hargrove's Tavern sat on the edge of town, squatting in the dark like some forgotten beast. The wooden sign above the door creaked in the wind, its faded letters barely legible. Hargrove's. 1912. The bar had always been there, or at least it felt like it. A place of low murmurs, cheap whiskey, and the kind of dim lighting that made even the loneliest souls feel a little less alone. On this particular night, the wind howled through the parking lot, rattling the neon open sign in the window. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, sweat, and the ghosts of bad decisions. A few regulars hunched over their drinks, their faces lost in the amber glow of the bottles lining the back wall. The bartender, a man called Joe, wiped down the counter with the same dirty rag he'd probably used for a decade. His face was lined like a roadmap of regret. Then, at exactly 11:59 p.m, the door swung open, though no wind followed. The man who entered was tall and gaunt, dressed in a threadbare black suit. His skin was pale as wax, his eyes sunken, his lips barely a slash in his face. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had all the time in the world. He sat at the bar without a word, his long fingers tapping idly against the wood. Joe, not one to turn down a paying customer, reached for a glass. "What'll it be?" The stranger's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. "Whiskey," he said, voice as dry as autumn leaves. "Neat." Joe poured, but as he slid the glass across the bar, he noticed the man's fingers had left behind a faint white imprint, as if the wood had frosted over. The regulars took notice, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Old Earl, a veteran of too many lost wars, muttered something under his breath and turned back to his drink. No one spoke. The stranger lifted the glass, inhaled deeply, and took a sip. He exhaled, and the air seemed to grow colder. "Cold night," Joe ventured, trying to ignore the way his breath was starting to mist. The stranger nodded. "Colder, still, where I come from." Joe felt a shiver dance along his spine. "Where's that?" The stranger's eyes met his. Something deep and bottomless swam there. "Not far," he said. "Closer than you think." A silence settled over the bar, thick and oppressive. The jukebox, which had been playing some old blues tune, flickered and died. A single bulb above the counter popped, showering the floor in tiny shards of glass. The regulars tensed, their drinks forgotten. The stranger set his empty glass down. The frost on the wood spread like veins of ice. "I believe it's last call." Joe frowned. "We don't close till 2. The stranger smiled. This time it was real. And terrible. "Not tonight!" And just like that, the lights went out. The darkness wasn't ordinary. It was thick, suffocating, alive. The room filled with the sound of chairs scraping, gasps of alarm. Joe felt the cold crawl over his skin, 1,000 unseen fingers skittering across his flesh. Then came the whispers. They slithered through the blackness, curling into ears, dripping into minds. Soft, insidious things, filled with promises and sorrow. Joe could hear them all around him. Voices he knew, voices he'd long forgotten. His mother, long dead. His brother, buried in a shallow grave outside Tulsa. They called to him, beckoning. A scream shattered the air, followed by a dull thump. Someone hit the floor. Then another, then another. Joe stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell is this?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger's voice was close now, right beside his ear. The end of things. Joe's hands found the counter, gripping it as if it were the last solid thing in the world. His skin burned where it touched the frozen wood. His breath came faster, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then, silence. The lights flickered back to life. The bar was empty, no regulars, no broken glass, no overturned chairs, just Joe. And the stranger. The man in black stood adjusting his sleeves. "A pleasure," he murmured. "Until next time." He turned and walked toward the door, his steps silent. Joe wanted to scream, to move, to do anything, but he was frozen in place. The door creaked open, and a gust of wind rushed in, carrying the scent of earth and decay. The stranger stepped out into the night and was gone. Joe let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands trembled as he reached for the bottle of whiskey, pouring himself a double. He downed it in one gulp, the burn a reminder that he was still alive. For now. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, the whispers began again.